Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us. My name is Brad Katz. I'm a client experience manager here with Blackboard, and I'm happy to introduce Sephra Scheuber. Sephra has many passions ranging through technology, education, and music. She has a bachelor's degree in audio engineering from Middle Tennessee State University and a master's in arts and experimental psychology from the University of Central Oklahoma. She's been an instructor in higher education since 2013 and has built courses in several modalities for her own use and the use of her fellow instructors. Sephra currently works in the role of instructional designer at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce her and pass her over to the group.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad you've joined us today. I'm Sephra, and today we're going to talk about using reflective discussion and automated feedback to increase engagement. So the first question that kind of comes up with this is, why did I put these two methods together? It seems a little bit random, right? But really what happened is I noticed these two things as common threads in courses that I designed that were doing really well. These two elements tend to be present. So we're going to talk a little bit about what these are and how to use them in your courses. Wow, such empty. You've probably experienced this situation before in an online course or hybrid course. I know I have. Sometimes students who engage a lot in face-to-face classroom discussion, for whatever reason, are less likely to engage in those discussions online. So how can we make it more likely that they will participate in these discussions, especially whenever they're not even required? So we're going to learn a little bit about how to get students excited about discussions, how to get them to engage more with the material. We are also in the process going to try to improve their recall of their learning and correct some misunderstandings they might have about the subject before those misunderstandings become too permanent. So first, I would like you all to practice some reflection and reflective discussion before I tell you about my own resources and experiences and tools. So think about a time when you've taught an online or a hybrid course. Or, for some of you, if you haven't actually taught an online course, maybe you had to move your face-to-face course online during all of the COVID stuff. So think of one of those courses and a course in a time when students were very actively engaged in the learning process. What was something that you did that was different than what you've done in other courses that might have engaged those students? So what's something that you noticed that you did in an online or hybrid course that really engaged students? And it might not be at all related to what I'm talking about today, but I would just like you to reflect on that and share that in the chat, as I think, we can share tools and help one another. So reflective discussion is something that's based on the theory of constructivism. And constructivism says that learning is unique to each individual learner and their own personal experiences. So this is why active learning is a big part of constructivism, but it's also based around the idea that new learning builds on prior knowledge of your students. So the reason why I go toward this is that the more findings we have in neuroscience and learning psychology, this theory seems to be more and more supported all the time. The neuroscience suggests that connections that are built into existing networks of knowledge are actually more easily accessed by the learners. So if students already have some knowledge about a subject or some experience about a subject, and then you can add learning into their previous knowledge, then that makes that knowledge easier to access for them. So let me give you an example of how this is used in advertising. Most of us know something about the concept of Christmas, right? We have a concept around that. Well, the brand Coke took advantage of that by putting a Santa image on their branding, so that every time we think about Christmas, there's a small likelihood that we will also think about Coke, right? So they want, and whenever we see that Coke branding, we associate it with the joy and the time that we associate around Christmas time. So these associations we make within our memory are really important. So how can we leverage students' prior knowledge to engage them in their new learning? And what about if they haven't had a class in this subject before, so they don't have a really solid point of reference? Well, everybody wants to talk about themselves. And I think this is a pretty true statement. And so some examples of ways that you can draw on students' prior experience, we want to think about whatever prior experience they might have, even in their everyday lives, that would be associated with the ideas in the course. So, for example, you might teach a biology course to students who have never taken biology before, but they all have a body and they all interact with living things every day, right? So they can still draw from their life experiences because it still connects to the subject matter. I taught a music appreciation course, upper division elective, at one time, and this was for students across all majors. So I had nursing majors, I had business majors, a lot of students who didn't necessarily have training in music, but they did have a great interest in music. And I would ask questions like this: share a song that you think has a great melody. Why do you think it's so good? And you might think that students might not have any concept of why a melody might be good. But upon reflection, many students would actually come up with some really good answers. You know, even some of those answers were just, I'm able to sing along with this melody easily, or it's very memorable, right? Or it repeats a lot, so I could catch on really quickly. So those types of answers actually give them a really good framework to start with. Another example is if you were teaching a software development course, you could ask students to share an app that they think is fun and easy to use, and ask them what makes it fun, right? So try to think about some examples for your own courses of where students might have previously encountered the material that you're going to be talking about, or something related to that material. So my experience with this has been that it's no longer really about the requirements. It's about sharing their perspectives. So oftentimes that results in students' responses going beyond the requirements in the class because they want to share more about what they already know or what they've already experienced. And then that leads to students engaging with one another more often. So students can relate to each other's ideas and experiences. They might say, "Oh, I love that song too. I think you're totally right about what makes it so good," right? Things like that. And then students also know kind of what to look for in the course content. So after students have done this type of reflection, when they dig deeper into the content of the course, they're looking for things that tie to their own ideas that they're bringing to the table. And they're making those connections a little bit more easily. And then this leads to students, of course, recalling that material more easily. So I really, really recommend doing this at the very start of a module. It's a great way to get students immediately interested in the concepts of the module and immediately interacting with one another, and just start off the module on a positive note. Okay, So we know how to engage students at the beginning of a module, but what about when they actually practice these new skills and learning? What should we do to help engage them then? And I'm going to make a case for engaging them through some immediate feedback. And yes, I'm also talking about automated feedback to some level. Now, immediate feedback, the reason why that's so helpful is because it can correct misunderstandings that the students have early on so that students don't continue to rehearse an incorrect thing. So I don't know about you, but oftentimes when I've taken a test or something, I leave the test and I start thinking back, okay, how did I answer that one? Was that correct? Yeah, I think that was right. So they're going back and rehearsing all of these answers that they've given very often. And so if we can give them feedback immediately, that can keep students from rehearsing things that are incorrect. So here are some examples. You could give students correct answers and explanation right after they take a quiz. You might have done this in a face-to-face format, right, where students hand in their quizzes and you immediately go over the answers. And I'm sure you're familiar with the groaning that happens after that. Everyone goes, oh, I almost put the right answer. So that is helpful, though, because they immediately recognize where they went wrong. Or you could give students a correctly completed assignment right after they turned in their own assignment. So here are some other ways you can do this. With quizzes and tests, you can encourage more active learning during this feedback process by adding extra feedback so that students can actually find the correct answer on their own. So the way that I've seen or used this is often giving students, instead of just telling them the correct answer, giving them the page number or the content area to find the correct answer. You can also add adaptive release items so that when students complete the assignment, they turn it in, and then as soon as they turn it in, they can see the correct assignment, a correct version of the assignment, so that they can compare their assignment side by side with the correct version. So this is great for math problem processes where they don't just need to know the correct answer, they need to know where they went wrong in the process, or things like graphing where maybe they did the setup of the graph incorrect or something like that. Now, I want to make a point that this is not meant to discourage those one-on-one interactions with students. Instead, this is meant to focus the instructor's time on feedback in certain areas, not just correcting this is right or this is wrong, or you didn't quite understand this part of the process. So it frees up some time for instructors so that they can use that one-on-one feedback time and that personalized feedback time more effectively. So in that music appreciation course I was talking about, just as an example, students would graph out a melody. So they wouldn't actually notate the melody in traditional notation because they weren't trained in music, but they would graph out the shape of the melody. So once they had turned in their practice for that, they could then see my correct answer and compare our graphs side by side. And very often this showed students where they maybe weren't paying enough attention to the melody, or what types of things they were missing, or maybe how the graph could have been set up in a better way. So let's get into the kind of nuts and bolts of this. So in order to add feedback within Blackboard, you'll need to go to your test question settings first and enable provide feedback for individual answers if you want to do it on an individual answer basis. And then you'll need to actually go in where you edit the test questions and add feedback there. And then this is the part that some people miss, is you want to modify your actual test options to be sure that students can see the correct combination of things that you want them to see and when you want them to see it. So that's what I'm showing you here is in the test options under show test results and feedback to students. You can choose when you want them to see that, the score per, if you want them to see the score per question, if you want them to see the correct answer, their answer, the feedback, things like that. So just make sure that you're showing the things that they need to see there. For the immediate feedback, another thing that we can do is use this adaptive release. So you can add an actual item for your feedback in the content area. So that would be the correct version of the assignment. And then once you've added that item, you can use the drop down next to it in the content area and choose adaptive release. And then if you scroll down to where it says grade, you can select a grade item in the grade center that release is dependent on. And then what I usually do is click this selector that says user has at least one attempt for this item. So in this case, the way it's set up is once the student has attempted the item, then they can see the correct version. Now you can change this to students who have a particular score. For example, if they score below a certain level, they will then see the correct version. However, that will mean your feedback is not as instantaneous, right? It will wait until you've actually graded the item. So those are a couple of options for you there. Here are some more tools and tips from me. So the first thing is always analyze your learners, but specifically when we're using this reflective discussion, you can analyze your learners and think about what all of their past experience has been with the topic in your course. And very often, the longer you brainstorm on this, the more things you find that students have probably experienced that actually relate to your course content, even though they've experienced it outside of an academic setting. The second thing is, if you find that a large group of students misunderstood a certain part of an assignment, you'll want to upload a detailed explanation of that topic. And I usually do this as an announcement. So this is an alternative to what many of us get caught up in often, which is where, we may be grading assignments, and as we're going through and grading, we're seeing again and again the same mistakes happening, right? Oh, they did it too. They did it too. Oh, yeah. So we're seeing the same issue come up and the same misunderstanding. So instead of copying and pasting sort of your feedback from one student to another, if you find that a bunch of students misunderstood a topic, just respond to that. Go into your announcements and post a video of you explaining and breaking down that idea. A third tool is OneNote. Microsoft OneNote is what I use usually for these adaptive release items. And that's because it allows you to easily create and export graphs and steps for math problems and things like that to show students where they might have gone wrong. So I'll show you what that looks like from my side. So you just go in, you draw or type a correctly done assignment, or some feedback if you want, and you can change this to be graph paper or different things like that. And then you actually use the print feature, and then there's an option that says Microsoft Print to PDF, and that actually creates a PDF file that you can then upload to Blackboard. Here are some resources I have. These are a couple of journal articles that I used during my research, and I believe the links to these may be posted in the chat, hopefully. And these really helped me in gathering my thoughts on the psychology side of things. So here we are, questions and discussion. So does anyone have questions for me?
Yeah, so there were a couple of questions that came up. A lot of it, the chat just had a lot of good suggestions from your solicitation of
Yeah.
strategies that people use and the kinds of questions they use. There was Tyra and Kelly both brought up the question of providing immediate feedback and academic integrity. So in providing feedback, what does that do around other students having access to those answers?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so I would encourage you in that case, you do have to be careful going from one semester to the next when you're doing that type of thing, where you really have to change the things you're asking students to do very often. And it kind of depends on the nature of the assignment too, right? So for some of the graphing assignments, I was doing this for, it's really a process-driven thing, and so generally speaking, students really can't cheat on it. But there are certainly many instances, especially in math courses, where you really have to change what you're asking students to do and the problems you're asking them to solve in order to avoid that type of issue. Yeah, that's a great point.
There was another question. Jeffrey asked a question. It's less of a question, but talked about the challenge of providing immediate feedback for different kinds of assessments. So essays, as opposed to more quantitative or short answer type of feedback. Do you have any strategies that you can share?
Yeah, so this is another case where it might be good to think about it this way. So in many courses, what I do is I first give students an example, right? As I'm actually teaching the content, they do have an example to look at, but the question or the problem that they're working on is different from the initial example, right? They're not just replicating the example. But then after they've turned in their content, you can give them an example that's actually something that has been written up that is an answer to the same question that was done successfully, right? So, and with essays, of course, every student's essay is going to be different. However, there might be some elements that they can pick up on by looking at another student's, of course, with prior approval, if it's another student's work or the teacher's work, on what a truly exemplary assignment would look like on that particular question. So they can think about how to, conceptualize these questions that you're asking.
Okay. I think there was some follow-up on one of your recommendations around the feedback, and I think some folks were asking about the cheating less semester to semester and more within the semester. And I think there were some suggestions following up around not providing feedback as soon as they've turned it in. So it's not quite immediate, but it's the timing is close, right? So some folks were talking about setting feedback to when, after the due date or after all submissions have been submitted, that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's again, depending on the nature of the assignment, definitely worth doing it different ways.
Great. Now, it was less of a question, but one of the things that somebody, I think Raul, recommended in chat was also using some of the other tools around assessments in Blackboard, things like question pools, which he talked about being able to make it more dynamic, but also introducing a challenge of, if you are going to come back as a group and do like a group review of the assessment, if everybody had different questions, it's not just sequencing. But there are some other tools, and I don't know if you want to speak to any of the other tools that you use, maybe to add some nuance or flexibility around how you build those assessments out.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add in terms of that, but I think certainly that's beneficial. And And those types of things where you can get students maybe together into a collaborate session right after a due date happens. I think that's another great way to give that immediate feedback. Again, just so that students don't continue rehearsing that incorrect information and understanding. So if they can share with each other, their own questions that they missed and things like that, that's a great way to do that. Absolutely.
Great. I think we have a little more time. Hopefully I haven't missed anybody's questions in chat. You can post them in the chat and I'll surface them. Do you want to, Sephra, do you want to talk about some other ways that you can create reflective discussion?
Yeah. So current event presentations are something that I've found really useful, especially in courses where students may not have actually had a lot of experience with the course content. So I know I mentioned that often they've had more experience than we realize with the content of our courses, which I think is true. But there are obviously occasions where students really might not have a good frame of reference. So if there are current events that might be happening related to this content, and you can kind of direct them maybe toward the resources where they can gather that information. If students can present on current events that are happening in the field or whatever, and then they can reflect on what they think about that current event or what they think about these happenings in the field and how they relate to it based on their other life experiences, right? So that's a way that you can get them still to tie in their new learning with their experiences, even if they haven't had a lot of experience in that specific area. So that's a great example that I like to use. And you can also think about from a more personal perspective, right? When you're looking at current events, very often it's about what people have done, the actions they've taken. And so students can kind of look at those actions and say, what could have been done better here, or what did they do really well in this case?
I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions here. I don't see anything coming up. One thing that from my pre-Blackboard days is also the ability to, I'll just toss the suggestion out there, but ways of using feedback not just on incorrect answers, but also correct answers.
Yeah.
To reinforce and building some of the almost front loading, right? Using rubrics to front load certain kinds of feedback, right? So the feedback is reinforcing what you've already established as the criteria for what constitutes, certain evaluation of what people have submitted.
Yeah, rubrics are a great way also to add kind of that automated feedback piece and especially that immediate feedback piece as well. Of course, that's another example that sometimes I don't think about because that's my assumption is, if you're teaching an English course, right, we tend to use rubrics and things like that. But I think those are really vital to students. And what it does is it just consolidates. Again, it keeps the instructor focused on the feedback that really is pertinent to that specific student instead of just repeating the same things over and over to every single student. You can show, you did great on critical thinking, but you didn't do so great when it comes to proofreading and grammar, And so instead of having to say that over and over, students can just see that reflected in the rubric, and then you can focus on more specifics. But yeah, absolutely, giving positive feedback to and positive reinforcement is so important, because otherwise, if students don't know what they're doing well, then they don't know, to continue to do that, right? They might think, oh, I did really bad. I just need to start from scratch and try a different approach, right? So definitely feedback on what students are doing well is important too. Yeah.
Great. Well, I am. I'm just looking. It looks like there are a couple of other comments, but I want to thank you for a really great session today and a lot of really good information. This is being recorded, so I know that it'll give you the opportunity to see what people have also provided in the chat while you've been talking, but also some of the resources and responses that people have brought. So.
Excellent. Well, I would just like to say thank you so much to everyone who attended and who shared your own thoughts and ideas. I'm excited to go through and look at those. And thank you to Blackboard for having me today. And I really enjoyed it. And I've enjoyed the other sessions as well. They've been really, really great.
Great. Well, thank you all so much.